Xenowatchers fled in terror when a human pulverized a Deathworld Leviathan bare-fisted became reality as Kale, glowing with crimson energy, leapt onto the monstrous creature pursuing his team. With impossible strength, he drove his fist into the beast's fossilized skull. The ancient armor, impervious to acid oceans and crushing depths, shattered like glass beneath his human hand. The purple-tinted waves of the acid ocean crashed against the jagged basalt shoreline of Paris, sending plumes of corrosive mist into the atmosphere. Kale Aranth squinted through his reinforced visor at the churning sea, making notes on his datapad as the Xenowatchers behind him adjusted their recording equipment. The howling wind carried particles that would strip unprotected flesh to bone in minutes. Yet Kale felt an odd sense of peace, watching this deadly display of nature's power. Preliminary atmospheric readings suggest increased volatile compound concentration, he said into his suit's recording device. The 17th survey expedition of Paris may have coincided with the beginning of this Deathworld's acid storm season. Kale was the senior xenobiologist for the Exploration Alliance's survey team, dispatched to the harshest environments humanity had discovered among the stars. Paris, orbiting the distant star Zeta 9, had quickly earned its classification as a Deathworld after the first expedition lost half its members to the planet's numerous hazards. Now, 7 years and 16 expeditions later, the Alliance had established proper protocols and equipment that allowed scientists to study this hostile environment with somewhat reduced risk. Behind him, Lyra Vaughn, the Xenowatcher team leader, gestured for her crew to adjust their hovering camera drones. "Tighten the formation," she ordered, her voice crisp through the comm system. "We need comprehensive documentation of the acid surge patterns. The Analytics Division believes there may be megafauna that surfaces during these chemical upwellings." The Xenowatchers were an elite division of observers, trained to document alien life without interference. Their primary directive was to record and analyze, never to engage. They were the eyes of the Alliance, maintaining the strict non-intervention protocols that had been established after early colonial disasters on more hospitable worlds. Kale respected their dedication to scientific objectivity, though he sometimes found their detachment frustrating. As a xenobiologist, he craved hands-on interaction with specimens, but understood the necessity of their cautious approach, especially on a planet like Paris. "Team, stay within the designated safety perimeter," Kale reminded the 6 expedition members spread out along the rocky outcropping. "The atmospheric sensors are showing increased toxicity levels from the acid surge." Thal Cree, the expedition's psychological analyst, moved closer to Kale. His tall, thin frame seemed almost fragile within the bulky environmental suit. "Fascinating how you maintain such composure," Thal observed. "Most humans display significant stress responses when exposed to environments as hostile as Paris, even within protective gear." Kale smiled behind his visor. 17th expedition, remember? I've been on 12 of them. After a while, you either develop nerves of steel or request transfer to greenhouse planet studies. Nevertheless, your physiological readings are remarkably stable," Thal persisted. "I'd be interested in running a more comprehensive analysis when we return to the orbital station. If you're suggesting I'm not human enough to be properly terrified of this death trap of a planet, I'll take it as a compliment," Kale replied with a short laugh. Their conversation was interrupted by an excited call from Dax Oren, the team's engineering specialist who was monitoring the sample collection vessel, anchored 50 meters offshore. "Movement detected beneath the collection vessel," Dax's voice crackled through the comm. "Massive thermal signature rising from approximately 200 meters below." Kale turned sharply, his attention drawn to the small research vessel bobbing on the purple waves. The specialized craft was designed to withstand the corrosive ocean while collecting samples of the unique chemical compounds that comprised Paris's seas. "All Xenowatchers, focus recording equipment on the collection vessel," Lyra commanded, her professional tone tinged with excitement. This could be our first documentation of deep ocean megafauna on Paris. Dax, initiate emergency withdrawal of the sampling equipment, Kale ordered. We don't want to provoke whatever's down there. Already on it, Dax responded. But there's something strange. The retrieval mechanisms are experiencing resistance. Something might be... His words cut off as the collection vessel suddenly lurched upward, lifted entirely out of the acid ocean by something massive rising beneath it. The ship, designed to withstand the caustic environment, but not direct physical assault, groaned as metal twisted. "Evacuation Protocol Theta!" Kale shouted. "Everyone back to the transport shuttle, now!" The expedition team began a hasty retreat toward their landing craft, situated 200 meters inland, on a relatively stable plateau. The Xenowatchers, however, maintained their positions, cameras trained on the incredible sight unfolding before them. From the churning purple waves emerged a creature of nightmarish proportions. Its head alone dwarfed the collection vessel, which now sat precariously atop what appeared to be an armored, fossilized skull plate. The creature's hide was a patchwork of stone-like segments interlaced with pulsing, bioluminescent tissue that glowed an eerie blue against the purple backdrop of the ocean. "Deathworld Leviathan," Lyra whispered, the awe in her voice transmitting clearly through the comm system. "First confirmed sighting." The behemoth rose higher, revealing a body that seemed impossible in its scale. Vestigial limbs, more like massive tusks or claws, extended from what might have been a torso, each tipped with crystalline structures that refracted the planet's dim sunlight. "All personnel, immediate evacuation," Kale repeated more urgently. "That creature is easily classified as an apex predator. We cannot risk engagement." The Leviathan let out a sound that defied description, part mechanical grinding, part organic roar, that vibrated through the ground beneath their feet. With a casual movement that belied its enormous size, it flung the collection vessel toward the shore. The ship tumbled through the air before crashing into the rocky coastline, less than 30 meters from where several Xenowatchers stood, frozen in a mixture of terror and professional fascination. Kale watched in horror as the impact dislodged a section of the unstable cliff face, sending rocks and one of the Xenowatchers tumbling toward the acid sea below. Without conscious thought, he found himself sprinting toward the edge, environmental suit whining with the strain of his sudden movement. "Kale, stop!" Thal's voice shouted through the comm. "The structural integrity of that entire section is compromised." Ignoring the warning, Kale reached the crumbling edge just as he saw a Xenowatcher. He couldn't identify which one through their identical environmental suits, clinging desperately to a jagged outcropping 10 meters down the cliff face. Below them, the acid waves crashed hungrily against the rocks, sending up corrosive spray that was already beginning to eat through the outer layer of the Xenowatcher's suit. Without hesitation, Kale secured his position and reached down, stretching his arm toward the stranded team member. "Grab my hand!" he shouted. The Xenowatcher looked up, terror visible even through their visor, and reached upward. Their gloved fingers brushed against Kale's, but couldn't establish a grip. "I can't reach," the voice, female, possibly one of the junior recorders, cried out. Kale felt a surge of desperate determination. The cliff section was continuing to crumble, and the Xenowatcher's suit would fail within minutes under the acid spray. He made a decision that contradicted all safety protocols. "Hold on," he instructed, and then did something that should have been impossible. He drove his reinforced glove into the solid rock of the cliff face, creating a handhold where none existed. The material of his glove tore slightly, but held as he lowered himself further down, bracing with his feet against unstable rock. "How did you—" the Xenowatcher began, but cut off as Kale reached her position and gripped her suit's shoulder harness. "Don't think, just hold on to me," Kale ordered, surprised at his own strength as he began pulling them both up the cliff face, one impossible handhold at a time. Behind them, the Leviathan let out another earth-shaking roar, seemingly angered by the destruction of the collection vessel. Kale could feel the vibrations through the rock, threatening to dislodge his precarious position. With a final surge of effort that sent pain shooting through his muscles, Kale pulled himself and the Xenowatcher over the edge of the cliff onto relatively stable ground. They collapsed together, breathing heavily as the rest of the team rushed toward them. "That was impossible," Lyra stated flatly, staring at Kale through her visor. "No human could have done what you just did." Kale looked down at his gloves, noticing for the first time that the reinforced material had torn completely away from his right hand, exposing his skin to Paris's toxic atmosphere. Yet, impossibly, his flesh showed no signs of chemical burns or damage. Instead, faint red lines pulsed beneath his skin, tracing patterns like circuitry from his wrist up his arm, visible even through the remaining sections of his suit. "We need to go," Dax interrupted, pointing toward the ocean where the Leviathan was now moving parallel to the shoreline, its massive body sending waves crashing against the already unstable cliff. "That thing seems to be heading toward the inlet near our shuttle landing zone. If it reaches there before us, we'll be cut off." Kale nodded, trying to process what had just happened while focusing on the immediate threat. "Everyone move inland now. We'll take the radiation desert route back to the landing zone. It's longer, but should keep us away from the coastline." "The radiation desert?" one of the Xenowatchers protested. "Our suits aren't rated for extended exposure to those levels." "They'll hold for the 4 hours we need," Kale responded, helping the rescued Xenowatcher to her feet. "The alternative is waiting for that Leviathan to leave, which could be days, time we don't have given our oxygen reserves." The team gathered their essential equipment, abandoning the heavier monitoring stations. The Xenowatchers, however, carefully preserved their recording devices, unwilling to lose the unprecedented footage of the Leviathan even in the face of danger. As they began their trek inland toward the shimmering heat of the radiation desert, Kale fell into step beside Thal, who was studying him with unconcealed scientific interest. "Your hand should be dissolving in this atmosphere," Thal stated quietly, keeping his voice on a private channel. "And no human muscle structure could puncture solid rock or lift another person's weight with one arm under these gravitational conditions." Kale glanced down at his exposed hand again, watching the red lines pulse beneath his skin before fading to normal. "I don't have an explanation," he admitted. "I just reacted." "Have you experienced anything like this before?" Thal pressed. "No," Kale responded, then hesitated. "Though, there have been dreams, memories that don't feel like my own, sensations of strength I shouldn't possess." Thal nodded thoughtfully. "The Alliance's genome enhancement programs for space adaptation have had some unexpected expressions in certain individuals. Your file mentions you're a third-generation spaceborn?" "Fourth," Kale corrected. "My great-grandparents were among the first colonists on Proxima Station." "Interesting," Thal murmured. "We should discuss this further when we're safe. For now, I suggest you find replacement gloves in the emergency packs. Whatever is happening with your physiology, it would be unwise to test its limits unnecessarily." Kale nodded, but as he reached for the spare equipment pack, he caught Lyra watching him, her expression unreadable behind her visor. The rescue had been recorded by multiple Xenowatcher cameras. He realized his impossible feat of strength would be scrutinized by Alliance scientists for years to come. The group made steady progress away from the coastline, the purple haze sky gradually shifting to a sickly yellow as they approached the radiation desert. Behind them, they could still hear the occasional roar of the Leviathan, but the sounds grew more distant as they pressed inland. The radiation desert of Paris was a vast expanse of crystalline sand that absorbed and refracted the intense radiation from Zeta-9. The ground glittered with an unnatural beauty, each grain containing compounds that resonated with and amplified the star's emissions. Standard protection suits could withstand the exposure for limited periods, but extended presence would eventually overwhelm their shielding. "Stay in formation," Kyle instructed, as they entered the desert proper. "The navigation beacons are spaced every kilometer. We follow them directly to avoid the sink pits." "Sink pits?" asked the Xenowatcher Kale had rescued, who had introduced herself as Alara during their journey inland. "Areas where the crystalline structure has degraded," Dax explained. "They look solid but will collapse under any weight. The entire desert is actually the dried bed of an ancient acid sea, with a honeycomb of caverns beneath." The team moved in silence for the next hour. The only sounds the crunching of their boots against the crystal sand and the constant low-level alerts from their suits, warning of increasing radiation exposure. Kale found himself taking point, his sensors somehow less affected by the radiation interference that plagued the others' equipment. "We should rest," Lyra announced as they reached the fourth navigation beacon. "The suits need time to cycle their radiation buffers." The team gratefully stopped, several members sinking to sit on the crystal surface. Kyle remained standing, scanning the horizon where heat distortions created mirages across the desert expanse. "How's your hand?" Dax asked, moving beside him and gesturing to where Kale had replaced his torn glove with an emergency sealant and a spare. "Fine," Kale replied. "No burns, no damage, it doesn't make sense." Dax was quiet for a moment before speaking again. His voice lowered. "There are rumors in the engineering corps about the early space adaptation programs. Experimental genetic modifications that went beyond radiation resistance and bone density enhancement." "What kind of modifications?" Kale asked, suddenly alert. "The kind that wouldn't be approved under current ethical guidelines," Dax said carefully. "Attempting to create humans who could survive direct exposure to space or function in high-gravity environments. Most failed, but some of the changes might have been passed down, dormant until triggered by extreme conditions." Kale considered this, thinking of his family's long history with the space program. "You think I'm carrying some kind of activated modification?" "It would explain what I saw on that cliff," Dax nodded. "And it would explain why the Alliance has taken such an interest in your career progression, always assigning you to the most extreme environments." Before Kale could respond, a tremor ran through the crystal desert floor, subtle at first but rapidly increasing in intensity. "Everyone up!" he shouted. "Something's coming!" The team scrambled to their feet as a second, stronger tremor shook the ground. Crystalline sand began to shift and slide away from a central point about 50 meters from their position, forming a widening sinkhole. "Move back toward the beacon," Lyra ordered, her professional calm still intact despite the clear danger. The Xenowatchers began a tactical retreat, cameras still recording as the sinkhole expanded. From its center emerged a massive crystalline structure, rising like a spire from beneath the desert floor. As more of it became visible, Kale realized with horror that it wasn't a structure at all. It was a limb, an enormous claw made of the same fossilized material as the Leviathan's armor. "It followed us underground," Thal stated, fascination overriding fear in his voice. "The caverns must connect to the ocean." "Forget analysis," Kale snapped. "Run! Head for the next beacon!" The team broke into a sprint across the unstable surface as more of the creature emerged from beneath the desert. The Leviathan's full form was even more terrifying on land, its segmented body dragging itself forward, using multiple crystalline appendages that dug into the ground like massive pitons. Kal found himself at the rear of the group, urging the slower team members forward while keeping an eye on the advancing behemoth. The creature moved with surprising speed for its size, closing the distance with alarming rapidity. "It's hurting us!" Dax shouted suddenly, pointing ahead where another section of the desert was beginning to collapse. "It's driving us away from the beacon path!" Kale saw immediately that Dax was right. The Leviathan's movement was forcing them to veer away from their planned route, toward an area of the desert unmarked by navigation beacons, likely riddled with sinkholes and other dangers. "Circle back," he commanded. "We need to stay on the beacon path." The team attempted to adjust their course, but the Leviathan anticipated the movement, its massive body blocking their route back to safety. One of the Xenowatchers, a junior recorder named Valens, stumbled as the ground shifted beneath him, falling dangerously close to one of the forming sinkholes. Kale changed direction instantly, sprinting toward the fallen team member. As he ran, he felt that same strange sensation from the cliff rescue, a surge of power flowing through his muscles, the red lines beneath his skin glowing visibly through the torn sections of his suit. He reached Valens just as the edge of the sinkhole began to crumble, grabbing the Xenowatcher's arm and pulling him away from danger, with such force that they both tumbled several meters across the crystal sand. "That's twice you've defied physics today," Valens gasped as they regained their footing. "Let's not try for a third time," Kale responded, guiding them back toward the main group who had managed to find a path around the Leviathan's blockade. The team reassembled at the fifth beacon, all members accounted for but many showing signs of suit damage from their desperate flight. The radiation alerts were becoming more insistent, and Kale could see that several team members were beginning to display early symptoms of radiation sickness despite their protection. "We need to increase pace," he stated, checking the navigation display. 3 more beacons to the edge of the desert, then 2 kilometers through the petrified forest to reach the landing zone. "Some of us won't make it at increased pace," Lyra observed clinically, gesturing to 2 Xenowatchers, whose movements were already becoming unsteady. "The radiation exposure is accumulating faster than projected." "Then we carry them," Kale said firmly. "Our priority should be preserving the observation data," one of the senior Xenowatchers interjected. "Protocol states that in extreme danger scenarios, equipment and data preservation takes precedence over—" "I don't give a damn about your protocols," Kyle cut him off. "We leave no one behind." "The Leviathan is still pursuing," Thal pointed out, looking back across the desert where the creature's massive form could be seen moving parallel to their position, occasionally disappearing underground, only to resurface closer. "It seems to have developed a specific interest in our group." "Or in me," Kale said quietly, a realization forming. "It changed course when I rescued the Xenowatcher at the cliff, and again when I pulled Valens from the sinkhole." "You think it's tracking your energy signature?" Dax asked. "The red glow under your skin. It could be emitting radiation on frequencies that attract the creature." "It's as good a theory as any," Kyle nodded. "Which means I could lead it away from the group." "Absolutely not," Lyra stated. "Separation from the team in these conditions would be suicide. It may be the only way to ensure everyone else reaches the landing zone," Kyle argued. "The shuttle can't launch with that thing nearby anyway. You've seen what it did to the collection vessel." "Your proposed self-sacrifice is admirable but flawed," Thal interjected. "The creature's attraction to you is a hypothesis, not confirmed fact. Additionally, your unusual abilities may be the group's best chance for survival if the Leviathan attacks directly." Kale wanted to argue further, but a particularly violent tremor interrupted their discussion. The ground between their position and the 6th beacon split open, revealing a gaping chasm that effectively cut off their planned route. "New plan," Kale decided quickly. "We detour south, aim for the 7th beacon directly. It's riskier terrain but cuts nearly an hour off our journey." "The southern approach has higher radiation levels," Dax warned. "And our alternative is waiting for that thing to surface directly beneath us," Kale countered. "We move south." The team altered course, pressing toward the edge of the desert with renewed urgency. The 2 weakened Xenowatchers were supported between stronger team members, their steps becoming increasingly erratic as radiation sickness progressed. Kale found himself walking alongside Thal, who was studying a portable scanner he'd modified to analyze Kale's unusual readings. "Your cellular structure is undergoing significant changes," the psychologist noted. "The radiation exposure appears to be accelerating whatever process began during the cliff incident." "Is that good or bad?" Kale asked, flexing his hand where the red lines were now permanently visible. no longer fading between pulses. Unknown, Thal admitted. But your radiation absorption is approximately 200% higher than normal human tolerance. Yet you're showing no symptoms of exposure. I feel fine, Kale confirmed. Better than fine, actually. Like I could run for days without tiring. Fascinating, Thal murmured. The old genetic programs may have succeeded better than their creators knew. Your body isn't just resisting the radiation. It appears to be processing it as energy. Their conversation ended abruptly as they reached the edge of the radiation desert. Before them stretched the petrified forest, a bizarre landscape of fossilized trees, twisted into impossible shapes, their stone branches reaching toward the sky like supplicating hands. 2 kilometers through the forest to the landing zone, Dax confirmed, checking his navigation system. The good news is that radiation levels drop significantly once we're under the canopy. And the bad news? Lyra asked. The Leviathan is still following. Dax pointed to their rear, where the creature could be seen emerging from the desert, its massive form silhouetted against the crystalline landscape. And it's moving faster now. Into the forest, Kale ordered. The dense growth might slow it down. The team entered the petrified woodland, weaving between massive stone trunks that towered 30 meters above them. Unlike the desolation of the radiation desert, the forest hummed with a strange energy. Not life, exactly, but a resonance that vibrated through the fossilized structures. The trees are conducting energy, Alara observed, her Xenowatcher instincts overriding even her fear. They're channeling the radiation from the desert into the ground, which explains why this area has lower readings. Dax nodded. The entire forest acts as a natural radiation sink. Stay alert, Kyle warned. Previous expeditions reported predatory life forms within the forest canopy. They moved as quickly as possible through the petrified terrain, helping the radiation-sick team members over gnarled stone roots that erupted from the ground like frozen waves. The forest grew denser as they progressed, the stone branches overhead creating a canopy that filtered the sickly light of Zeta-9 into dappled patterns across the ground. Behind them, the sounds of destruction indicated the Leviathan's progress, the crack and shatter of petrified trees being pushed aside by its enormous bulk. The creature was still following, but its size now worked against it in the confined space of the forest. 1 kilometer to the landing zone, Dax announced, checking his navigation display. We're making good time. Too good, Kale muttered, studying the forest ahead where the trees thinned out, revealing a wide, rocky channel cutting through the landscape. That's the acid river between us and the landing zone. We'll have to cross it. The group emerged from the densest part of the forest to face the final obstacle in their path. The acid river flowed sluggishly between steep banks, its surface bubbling occasionally as chemical reactions occurred within its purple depths. Unlike the ocean, the river was narrow enough to cross, if they had the right equipment. The emergency bridge deployment unit should be at the crossing point, Lyra stated, consulting her map. Standard procedure for all expedition routes. They followed the riverbank for several hundred meters until they reached the designated crossing point. As Lyra had indicated, a compact bridge deployment unit sat on their side of the river, a standard piece of Alliance emergency equipment designed to create a temporary spanning structure across hazardous terrain. Dax immediately moved to activate the unit, but his expression quickly turned to concern. There's damage to the deployment mechanism, he reported. It looks like acid corrosion. The last team must have had splashback during their crossing. Can you fix it? Kale asked. I can try. Dax knelt beside the unit, opening his toolkit. But it will take time. Time we don't have, Thal pointed out, gesturing back toward the forest where the sounds of the Leviathan's approach were growing louder. The creature will be here within minutes. Then we swim, one of the Xenowatchers suggested desperately. In acid, Alara responded incredulously. Our suits would dissolve before we made it halfway across. The team fell into tense silence, the gravity of their situation becoming clear. Behind them, A massive petrified tree toppled with a resounding crash. The Leviathan was less than half a kilometer away now. "Work as fast as you can," Kale instructed Dax, then turned to the others. "Everyone else, gather whatever debris you can find. If the bridge deployment fails, we'll try to create a makeshift crossing." The team scattered, collecting fallen petrified branches and other solid materials that might briefly withstand the acid. Kale helped where he could, but found himself constantly glancing back toward the forest, calculating the Leviathan's rate of approach against their dwindling time. "It's no use," Dax finally admitted after 10 minutes of frantic work. "The acid has compromised too many essential components. I can't get the bridge to deploy." Kale looked at their pile of collected debris. Nowhere near enough to create a crossing that would support even one person, let alone the entire team. The Leviathan's roar echoed through the forest, close enough now that they could feel the ground trembling beneath their feet. "There has to be another way across," Lyra insisted, her composure finally showing cracks as she scanned the river desperately. Kale stared at the bubbling acid flow, then down at his hand where the red energy continued to pulse beneath his skin. An impossible idea formed in his mind. "There is another way," he said quietly, "but you're not going to like it." Without waiting for a response, Kale began removing his environmental suit, starting with the helmet. "What are you doing?" Alara gasped. "The atmospheric toxins will kill you in minutes." "Maybe not," Kale responded, continuing to remove the protective layers. Thal's readings showed my body adapting, processing radiation as energy. It might do the same with the atmospheric compounds. "That's a massive leap in logic," Thal protested. "The radiation adaptation doesn't guarantee protection against corrosive chemicals." "We don't have alternatives," Kale stated firmly. Now down to the innermost layer of his suit. The red energy patterns were clearly visible through the thin material, covering not just his hand now, but spreading across his entire body in intricate, circuit-like patterns. "I'm going to wade across, secure a line, and help pull everyone over." "That's suicide," Lyra said flatly. "It's our only chance," Kale countered. "The Leviathan will be here any minute. We're out of options." Before anyone could stop him, Kale removed the final layer of protection, standing bare-chested at the edge of the acid river. The team watched in horrified fascination as he took a deep breath of Paris's toxic atmosphere and didn't immediately collapse. Instead, the red energy patterns beneath his skin flared brighter, seeming to process and neutralize the harmful compounds he was inhaling. Kale felt a burning sensation throughout his body, painful, but not debilitating. "It's working," he managed to say, his voice strained but functional. "I can breathe." Without giving himself time to reconsider, Kale stepped into the acid river. The corrosive liquid immediately began to attack his boots and pants, the only protection he'd kept. But where it touched his exposed skin, something extraordinary happened. The acid bubbled and steamed upon contact, but instead of dissolving his flesh, it seemed to be neutralized by the red energy that now glowed so brightly it illuminated the river surface around him. "Impossible," Thal whispered, recording the phenomenon with scientific precision despite the danger. "His body is actively counteracting the chemical reaction." Kale pushed forward, each step a battle against the burning pain and the river's viscous flow. The acid ate through his remaining clothing, but his skin remained intact, protected by the mysterious energy that had awakened within him. Halfway across, he heard the Leviathan crash through the final line of petrified trees at the forest's edge. The creature emerged into the clearing, its massive form even more terrifying in the open. It paused, as if surprised to find its prey separated by the acid river, then began moving along the bank toward the stranded expedition team. "It's coming for you!" Kale shouted back to the team. "Get ready to cross as soon as I secure the line." He redoubled his efforts, fighting through the pain as he neared the opposite shore. Behind him, he could hear the Leviathan's grinding roar as it approached his teammates, who were now backed against the river's edge with nowhere to retreat. With a final surge of effort, Kale reached the far bank and pulled himself onto solid ground. The red energy beneath his skin was pulsing at a frantic rate now, responding to his elevated heart rate and the stress of his body. He quickly secured the emergency line he'd carried across to a sturdy petrified stump, then signaled to the team. "Send the first person now," he called. On the opposite bank, Dax helped attach the line to Alara's suit, preparing to send her across suspended above the acid. But before they could begin, the Leviathan lunged forward, one massive crystalline limb smashing into the ground, dangerously close to the team. Kale watched in horror as his teammates scattered, the Leviathan's attack separating them from the crossing point. The creature seemed to focus its attention on Thal, who was still recording its movements with scientific detachment, despite the imminent danger. Without conscious thought, Kale found himself diving back into the acid river, swimming against the current with impossible speed toward the far shore. The red energy surrounding him intensified, creating a visible aura that cut through the purple liquid like a comet. He reached the opposite bank in seconds, rather than minutes, pulling himself onto the shore just as the Leviathan raised a massive limb above Thal, poised to crush the psychologist. "Get down!" Kale shouted, reaching Thal in 3 bounding strides and pushing him aside just as the crystalline appendage crashed down. Instead of avoiding the blow, Kyle did something that defied all human limitation. He caught the Leviathan's limb with his bare hands. The impact should have pulverized every bone in his body. Instead, the red energy exploded outward from his skin, creating a momentary shield that absorbed the initial force. Kyle's muscles strained against the impossible weight, tendons standing out like cables along his arms and shoulders. "Run!" he growled to Thal through gritted teeth. "Get everyone across the river!" Thal scrambled backward, still clutching his recording device, which was capturing every impossible second of Kale's stand against the behemoth. The other team members stared in shock before Lyra's training reasserted itself. "Everyone to the crossing point," she ordered. "Prepare for emergency transit." The Leviathan seemed confused by the resistance to its attack, its crystalline limb pressing down with increasing force against Kale's defense. The ground beneath Kale's feet began to crack and splinter from the pressure. With a roar that rivaled the creature's own, Kale shifted his stance and, impossibly, began to push back. The red energy now completely enveloped him, outlining his form in crimson light that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. "Go!" he shouted again to his teammates, who were rushing toward the river crossing, while continuously looking back at the impossible spectacle. With one tremendous effort, Kale shoved the Leviathan's limb aside, causing the massive creature to momentarily lose balance. Not wasting the opportunity, he sprinted toward his team, who had reached the crossing point and were preparing to traverse the acid river via the emergency line. "Get across," he instructed, helping secure Alara to the line. "I'll hold it off." "You can't fight that thing alone," Dax protested. "I'm not sure I'm alone anymore," Kale responded cryptically, glancing down at the red energy flowing through his body. The Leviathan had recovered from its momentary setback and was advancing again, multiple limbs raising and falling in a terrifying display of power as it approached the river's edge. Its armored head swiveled toward Kale, bioluminescent patches pulsing in what might have been recognition. One by one, the team members traversed the acid river, suspended from the emergency line that Kyle had secured. Thal, the last to cross besides Kale, paused before being attached to the line. "Whatever is happening to you," the psychologist said, "it appears to be an awakening rather than a transformation, as if this potential was always within you, dormant until needed." "Save the analysis for when we're safely off this planet," Kale replied, helping secure Thal to the line. As the psychologist began his crossing, the Leviathan reached the riverbank. It tested the acid with one crystalline appendage, which immediately began to dissolve upon contact. Unlike Kale, The creature had no protection against the corrosive liquid. For a moment, Kale thought they might escape, until the Leviathan revealed another adaptation. Its massive jaws opened wide, and it expelled a stream of solidifying chemical compound into the acid river. The substance reacted with the acid, creating temporary stepping stones of neutralized material. "It's building a bridge," Kale realized aloud. "It's intelligent enough to adapt its own biology to overcome obstacles." The Leviathan began crossing its self-created path, each massive step consuming one of the temporary platforms which dissolved behind it. It would reach their side of the river within moments. Kale glanced across to where his team had safely reached the opposite shore and were now racing toward the landing zone, visible on a plateau a few hundred meters away. They would make it, if the Leviathan was delayed. With grim determination, Kale turned to face the advancing behemoth. The red energy within him responded to his resolve, intensifying until his entire body glowed like a crimson star against the purple and yellow landscape of Perry. As the Leviathan reached the final stepping stone before the shore, Kale did the unthinkable. He charged directly at it, diving into the acid river and swimming toward the creature with impossible speed. The Leviathan paused, seemingly confused by prey that would attack rather than flee. This hesitation gave Kale the moment he needed. He reached the creature's massive fossilized leg and began to climb, his bare hands finding purchase on the rough, armored surface where no human should have been able to maintain a grip. The creature roared and thrashed, trying to dislodge the human that now clung to its body, scaling toward its armored head. Kale held on, the red energy protecting him from both the creature's toxic secretions and the splashing acid below. As he reached the Leviathan's massive skull plate, Kale found himself face to face with one enormous, bioluminescent eye that regarded him with unmistakable intelligence. In that moment of connection, Kale felt something unexpected, a flash of recognition, as if the energy within him and the life force animating this ancient creature shared some primordial origin. The moment passed as quickly as it had come. The Leviathan roared again, the sound at this proximity so powerful it threatened to rupture Kale's eardrums, despite his enhanced resilience. The creature reared back, preparing to fling itself forward onto the shore, where it could continue its pursuit of the fleeing humans. Kale knew he had one chance to end this. Drawing on every ounce of the mysterious power flowing through him, he pulled back his right fist, the same hand that had first shown signs of transformation on the cliff face. The red energy coalesced around his arm, spiraling from shoulder to fingertips in patterns that seemed to follow neural pathways but extended beyond normal human anatomy. With a primal scream that channeled all his fear, determination, and newfound power, Kale drove his fist directly into the center of the Leviathan's armored skull plate, the spot where the fossilized material looked thickest and most impenetrable. For one suspended moment, nothing happened. Then reality seemed to fracture along with the creature's armor. The fossilized plate, which had withstood the crushing pressures of Perry's deepest oceans and the corrosive touch of its acid seas, cracked beneath the impact of Kale's enhanced strike. The crack spread outward in a spiderweb pattern, red energy from Kale's fist flowing into the fissures like molten metal. The Leviathan thrashed in pain or shock, but Kale maintained his position, drawing back for a second strike. This time, when his fist connected, the armored plate shattered completely. Fragments of fossilized material exploded outward, some pieces the size of small vehicles. The Leviathan's roar transformed into a high-pitched keening that vibrated through the air with such intensity that petrified trees at the forest's edge began to crack and topple. Kale found himself thrown clear of the creature by the force of the impact, sailing through the air before crashing into the acid river. The red energy protected him from the worst effects of the corrosive liquid, but the impact still drove the breath from his lungs. He surfaced in time to witness the Leviathan's death throes. The creature's massive body convulsed, bioluminescent patches flaring and dimming in chaotic patterns. Without its protective skull plate, the sensitive neural tissues beneath were exposed to Perry's toxic atmosphere and the splashing acid. The Leviathan began to sink back into the river, its lifeless limbs no longer able to maintain the tenuous crossing it had created. As it disappeared beneath the purple surface, a final tremor ran through its enormous form. Not of pain, but almost like a release. Kale dragged himself to the shore, every muscle screaming in protest, despite his enhanced state. The red energy that had sustained him through the impossible battle was beginning to fade, retreating beneath his skin like a tide, pulling back from shore. He collapsed on the rocky bank, gasping for breath as his body struggled to process the strain it had endured. Looking across the river, he could see his team had reached the landing zone and were preparing the shuttle for emergency departure. They had made it. A movement caught his eye. Thal, standing at the river's edge opposite him, still recording. The psychologist had witnessed everything, from Kale's impossible stand against the Leviathan to the creature's spectacular death. Even at this distance, Kale could see the mixture of scientific fascination and human awe on Thal's face. With enormous effort, Kale pulled himself to his feet. The red energy flickered beneath his skin, responding to his determination but clearly diminished. He would need to cross the river again to reach his team. But the Leviathan's makeshift bridges had dissolved, and his own strength was fading. To his surprise, Dax appeared beside Thal, carrying what appeared to be spare environmental suit components. The engineer secured a line and began crossing back toward Kale's position. "You look like you could use a ride," Dax called, as he reached the midpoint of the river. Kale managed a weak smile. "I thought the protocol was to abandon anyone who couldn't make the extraction point on their own." "Protocol also says not to engage megafauna with your bare hands," Dax replied, reaching Kale's side of the river. Yet, here we are. As Dax helped him into the spare environmental gear, Kale noticed something odd about the engineer's manner, a lack of surprise or shock at what had transpired. "You don't seem particularly amazed by what just happened," Kyle observed, as they prepared to cross back. Dax hesitated before responding. "There's something you should know. The genetic modifications Thal mentioned, they weren't just random expressions in spaceborne generations." "What do you mean?" "Some of us were assigned to monitor potential carriers," Dax admitted. "I was supposed to observe and report, not intervene. But when I saw what was happening to you during the cliff rescue, I made a decision." "You knew about this?" Kale asked, gesturing to the fading red patterns beneath his skin. "Not exactly this." Dax shook his head. "The gene sequence was designed for adaptation to extreme environments. But no one expected it to manifest like what you just did. My role was to record baseline data, nothing more." "So you've been reporting on me this whole time? Every expedition?" "Yes," Dax acknowledged. "But I've also been your friend. That part wasn't in the protocol." Kale absorbed this revelation as they secured themselves to the crossing line. "Does anyone else on the team know?" "Thal suspects. I think the others, no. The Xenowatchers were never part of this particular project. Their arrival on this expedition was coincidental." As they began their crossing, suspended above the acid river, Kale looked back at where the Leviathan had disappeared beneath the purple surface. Despite everything, he felt a strange connection to the creature, both of them adaptations to an environment that should have been impossible to survive. "What happens now?" he asked as they neared the opposite shore. "That depends on you," Dax replied. "The footage Thal and the Xenowatchers captured will circulate throughout the Alliance. Some will see you as a hero who saved the expedition. Others will view you as something potentially dangerous, a human who exceeded the accepted boundaries of our species." Kale nodded slowly. "And what do you see?" Dax was quiet for a moment as they reached solid ground. "I see my friend," he finally answered. just with some unexpected talents. The rest of the team was waiting at the river's edge, their expressions a mixture of awe, fear, and scientific curiosity. Lyra stepped forward, her professional demeanor firmly back in place. "The shuttle is prepped for immediate departure," she stated. "We have approximately 30 minutes before the next acid storm makes atmospheric exit impossible." "Then we should go," Kale replied simply. As they made their way toward the landing zone, Kale found himself walking beside Alara, the Xenowatcher he had saved from the cliff face. "Why did you do it?" she asked quietly. "Risk everything to save me? To save all of us?" Kale considered the question. "Because that's what humans do," he finally answered. "We protect our own." "Even if it means becoming something else in the process?" she pressed. Kale looked down at his hand, where the last traces of red energy were fading beneath his skin, dormant once more, but undeniably present. "Maybe this isn't becoming something else," he mused. "Maybe it's just remembering what we've always been capable of." The shuttle loomed before them, its sleek form promising escape from the Deathworld of Paris. As the team boarded and prepared for departure, Kyle paused at the entrance, looking back across the alien landscape. The purple acid river glinted in the distance. Beyond it, the radiation desert shimmered with deadly beauty. And further still, the acid ocean where their journey had begun. He knew that whatever awaited him when they returned to the Alliance would be complex. Scrutiny, fear, perhaps even containment. The Xenowatchers' footage would spread, showing a human doing the impossible, challenging fundamental assumptions about humanity's limitations. Yet, as the red energy pulsed one final time beneath his skin before subsiding into dormancy, Kale felt something unexpected: hope, not just for himself, but for all humans who carried unknown potential within them, waiting for the right moment to awaken. With a deep breath of filtered air, he stepped into the shuttle and sealed the door behind him. The engines roared to life, vibrating through the craft as it prepared to break free from Paris's hostile grip. "Ready for departure," Lyra announced from the pilot's seat. "Take us home," Kale responded, strapping himself into a seat as the shuttle began its ascent. Through the viewport, he watched the Deathworld recede beneath them, its purple oceans and yellow skies growing distant. Somewhere below, the remains of a Leviathan sank deeper into the acid sea, returning to the depths from which it had emerged. As the shuttle broke through the upper atmosphere into the star-filled darkness of space, Kale closed his eyes, feeling the last of his enhanced state fade away. But he knew now that it wasn't gone, merely waiting, like an ember ready to ignite when needed. Whatever came next, whatever the Alliance decided about him, or the power he had displayed, one thing was certain: the universe's understanding of human potential had changed forever on the Deathworld of Paris. And somewhere in the endless expanse of space, other worlds waited, other challenges that might require humanity to remember what they were truly capable of becoming.